The fluorescent lights in the prison infirmary hummed their endless song as Nurse Rebecca Torres checked the monitors one more time. 20 years working in Texas prisons had taught her to expect anything, but the man in bed 7 still surprised her. Darius Mitchell lay perfectly still, his athletic frame diminished by months of decline, his dark eyes following her every movement with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Ms. Torres," his voice was rough but clear, "I need to ask you something." Rebecca had been avoiding this conversation for 3 days. Prisoners always wanted something in their final hours, a phone call, a message delivered, forgiveness they didn't deserve. She'd learned to keep her distance, to maintain professional boundaries that protected her heart from breaking every single shift. "Mr. Mitchell, you should rest. Save your strength." For what? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "We both know time is running short." He shifted slightly, wincing. "Please, just hear me out." Rebecca moved closer despite herself, checking his IV line to give her hands something to do. "What is it?" "I need you to take me outside, to the yard. I need to feel the Texas sun one more time." He paused, watching her reaction. "But that's not the real request." Rebecca's training told her to refuse immediately. Prisoners in his condition didn't leave the infirmary. Protocol was clear, but something in his voice made her hesitate. "Then what is the real request?" Darius reached under his pillow with trembling hands, producing a faded photograph. "I need you to find the woman in this picture, and I need you to tell her something I should have told her 30 years ago." Rebecca took the photograph, her breath catching. The woman was young, maybe 20, with kind eyes and a bright smile. She stood in front of a small house, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. Who is she? Someone who deserves the truth. Darius's eyes glistened. Someone who's been waiting for answers for 3 decades, and I'm the only one who can give them to her. Rebecca looked at the photograph again, then at the man before her. Every instinct screamed that this was a manipulation, a con, another prisoner trying to work the system one last time. But something in his eyes told a different story. "Mr. Mitchell, I can't just—" "Her name is Sarah Chen. She lives in Austin, or at least she did." Darius's voice grew stronger, more urgent. "And before you say no, before you walk away, you need to know something. That woman in the picture, she thinks I abandoned her. She thinks I chose prison over her and our child. But that's not what happened." Rebecca set the photograph on the bedside table. "Then what did happen?" "I took the fall for someone else. Someone who had everything to lose, while I had nothing. They promised me it would be a short sentence, that I'd be out in time to watch my son grow up." His voice cracked. "That was 30 years ago, and I never saw either of them again." "Why didn't you tell the truth?" "Because the person I protected had power, connections. They made it clear that if I talked, Sarah and the baby would pay the price." Darius closed his eyes. "So I stayed quiet. I let her think I was a criminal who didn't care. I let my son grow up believing his father was a coward who chose crime over family." Rebecca felt something shift in her chest. She'd heard 1,000 stories in this infirmary, most of them lies or half-truths designed to manipulate sympathy. But this felt different. "Even if I wanted to help you, I don't know how to find her. Austin is a big city. I know where she works, or where she used to work." Darius opened his eyes again. "St. David's Hospital. She was a nurse like you. Maybe she still is." The coincidence hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She'd trained at St. David's, had worked there for 5 years before transferring to the prison system. She knew people there, had connections that could help track down a former colleague. "What do you want me to tell her?" "The truth. All of it." Darius reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "But more than that, I want you to tell her I'm sorry. Sorry for the lie, sorry for the lost years, sorry for making her believe she wasn't worth fighting for." Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between her brown skin and his darker tone, both of them marked by years of service in institutions that demanded everything and gave back so little. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I'm asking." Darius released her hand. "Just think about it, but Ms. Torres, don't think too long. Each sunrise reminds me that chances don't last forever." Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. During her break, she sat in the staff room, staring at the young woman's face, trying to imagine what 3 decades of wondering had done to her. Had she moved on, remarried, told their son stories about a father who'd abandoned them? Or had she spent 30 years waiting for answers that never came? "You look troubled." Dr. James Martinez, the prison's medical director, poured himself coffee and sat across from her. "Mitchell?" Rebecca nodded. "He made a request, an unusual one. They always do at the end." James's voice was kind but weary. "What does he want?" She explained about the photograph, about Sarah Chen, about the message Darius wanted delivered. James listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. "Rebecca, you know I respect you. You're one of the best nurses I've ever worked with." He leaned forward. "But you also know that getting involved in a prisoner's personal life, especially one making deathbed claims about innocence, is dangerous territory." "I know." "Do you?" "Because I've seen good people get burned by believing the wrong story. Prisoners are experts at manipulation. They've had nothing but time to perfect their craft." "What if he's telling the truth?" James sighed. "Then it's a tragedy. But it's not your tragedy to fix. Your job is to provide medical care, not to right the wrongs of the justice system." Rebecca knew he was right. She told herself the same thing 1,000 times over the years, but something about Darius's story had gotten under her skin, had awakened something she'd thought she'd buried long ago. "What would you do?" she asked. "If it was you?" James was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I don't know. But I do know that once you start down this road, there's no turning back. You'll be opening doors that might be better left closed." That night, Rebecca drove home through the Texas darkness, the photograph sitting on her passenger seat like an accusation. She thought about her own father, who'd spent 10 years in prison for a crime he'd actually committed. She remembered visiting him as a child, the way the other inmates had looked at her, the shame she'd carried like a weight on her small shoulders. She'd become a prison nurse to understand that world, to make sense of the choices her father had made. But somewhere along the way, she'd built walls around her heart, had learned to see prisoners as cases rather than people. It was the only way to survive the work without being destroyed by it. But Darius Mitchell was threatening those walls. At home, she opened her laptop and searched for Sarah Chen at St. David's Hospital. Nothing current came up, but she found an old staff directory from 15 years ago. Sarah Chen, Ren Pediatric Unit. Rebecca stared at the listing, her heart pounding. It would be so easy to make a few calls, to track down where Sarah had gone, to deliver Darius's message, but it would also be crossing a line she'd sworn never to cross. Her phone rang, the prison's number flashing on the screen. Her stomach dropped. "Torres," she answered. "Rebecca, it's James. Mitchell's taken a turn. You need to come back." She was in her car before the call ended, the photograph clutched in her hand. The drive back to the prison felt endless, her mind racing with possibilities. What if he passed before she could decide? What if she never got the chance to hear the full story? What if Sarah Chen spent the rest of her life wondering? The infirmary was quiet when she arrived, just the night staff and the ever-present hum of machines. Darius lay in bed 7, his breathing labored, his eyes closed. But when she approached, they opened. "You came back." "I came back." Rebecca pulled a chair close to his bed. "Tell me everything, the whole story, and then I'll decide." Before we discover what Darius's last wish truly meant, we'd love to know where our listeners are from around the world. Drop a comment telling us your location, and if this story moves you, leave a like to help us share more stories of redemption and humanity. Now back to Darius's story. Darius took a shaky breath, gathering his strength. 30 years ago, I was working construction in Austin. Good job, good pay, good life. Sarah and I had just found out she was pregnant. We were planning the wedding, looking at houses, dreaming about the future. Rebecca listened, watching his face as he spoke. My boss was a man named Richard Castellano. Rich family, political connections, the kind of guy who always landed on his feet. We were working on a commercial project downtown when there was an accident. A worker fell from the scaffolding. What happened? Richard had cut corners on the safety equipment, saved money by using substandard materials. The worker who fell, his name was Miguel Torres, he didn't make it. Darius's voice broke. He had 3 kids, a wife, a whole life ahead of him. Rebecca felt ice in her veins. Torres, her family name. When did this happen? March 15th, 1994. Rebecca's hands began to shake. She knew that date. It was burned into her family's history, the day everything had changed. The day her Uncle Miguel had passed in a construction accident that was ruled negligent homicide. You knew Miguel Torres, Darius said softly. I can see it in your face. He was my uncle. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. They said the foreman was responsible. They said he'd been drinking on the job, that he'd ignored safety protocols. The foreman was me. Darius met her eyes. But I wasn't drinking, I wasn't negligent. Richard was. He'd ordered me to use the cheap equipment, threatened to fire me if I didn't. And when Miguel fell, Richard made me a deal. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. What kind of deal? Take the blame, do the time, and he'd make sure Sarah and the baby were taken care of. He'd pay for everything, medical bills, housing, education. He said if I fought it, if I told the truth, he'd use his connections to make sure Sarah lost everything. Her job, her reputation, her future. Darius's voice was thick with emotion. And he said he'd make sure your family never saw a penny of compensation. Rebecca stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're telling me you went to prison for my uncle's passing? That you let my family believe you were responsible? Yes. Darius didn't look away. And I'm telling you that Richard Castellano is the one who should have paid. But he had money and power, and I had nothing but a choice. Protect the woman I loved and the child I'd never meet, or tell the truth and watch everyone suffer. So you chose to lie. Rebecca's voice was sharp with anger and grief. I chose to survive, to make sure Sarah and our son had a chance. Darius struggled to sit up. But Richard didn't keep his promises. Once I was locked up, he disappeared. Sarah lost her job, lost the house, had to raise our son alone. And your family, they got nothing. No compensation, no justice, nothing. Rebecca paced the small space, her mind reeling. 30 years. Her family had spent 30 years believing Darius Mitchell was a negligent drunk who'd caused her uncle's passing. They'd carried that anger, that bitterness, that need for someone to blame. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm out of time, and because you're the only person who can make this right. Darius pulled out another envelope from under his pillow. I kept records. Emails, receipts, photographs of the equipment Richard ordered me to use. I documented everything, thinking someday I'd be able to use it. But I was too afraid, too broken by what I'd done. Rebecca took the envelope with trembling hands. What do you want me to do with this? Give it to Sarah. Tell her the truth about why I disappeared. And then, he paused, his breathing labored, give it to your family. Let them know that Miguel's passing wasn't random negligence. Let them know there's someone who should be held accountable. Richard Castellano. He's a state senator now. Respected, powerful, untouchable. Darius lay back, exhausted. But maybe, with the evidence I've kept, with the truth finally coming out, he won't be untouchable anymore. Rebecca looked at the envelope, then at the man before her. He'd stolen 30 years from Sarah, from his son, from her own family. But he'd also sacrificed everything to try to protect them, had carried the weight of a lie that had crushed him. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said honestly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Darius's eyes were closing. I'm asking for justice, for Miguel, for Sarah, for all of us who've been living with Richard's lies. Rebecca sat in the infirmary through the night, the envelope and the photograph on her lap. She thought about her uncle Miguel, about the stories her family told of his kindness and his dreams. She thought about Sarah Chen, raising a son alone while believing the father had abandoned them. She thought about Darius, spending 30 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And she thought about Richard Castellano, living a life of power and respect built on lies and other people's suffering. As dawn broke through the barred windows, Rebecca made her decision. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. First to her cousin Maria, who worked as an investigative journalist in Houston. Then to a lawyer friend who specialized in wrongful conviction cases. And finally, to St. David's Hospital, asking about former employees named Sarah Chen. Darius woke as she was finishing the last call. "You're doing it?" "I'm doing it." Rebecca moved to his bedside. "But not just for you, for my uncle, for your family, for everyone Richard Castellano has hurt. Thank you." Tears rolled down Darius's face. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get complicated, messy. There will be investigations, questions, media attention." Rebecca took his hand. "And you're going to have to be strong enough to tell your story, all of it, on record." "I will. Whatever it takes." Rebecca opened the envelope, scanning the contents. Emails between Darius and Richard discussing the substandard equipment. Photographs of the scaffolding before and after the accident. Receipts showing Richard's orders for cheap materials. And a handwritten confession, dated and signed, explaining everything. "You've been carrying this for 30 years. I moved it from cell to cell, hid it in different places, kept it safe." Darius's voice was weak but determined. "It was the only thing that kept me going. The knowledge that someday, somehow, the truth would come out. Why didn't you use it sooner? You could have appealed, could have fought for your freedom." "Because I was afraid. Afraid Richard would make good on his threats. Afraid Sarah would be hurt. Afraid your family would suffer more." He looked at her with haunted eyes. "Fear is a powerful prison, Ms. Torres. Sometimes stronger than these walls." Over the next 3 days, Rebecca worked tirelessly. Her cousin Maria came to the prison, interviewing Darius and reviewing the evidence. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Okonkwo, began filing motions and contacting the district attorney's office. And Rebecca finally located Sarah Chen, now Sarah Chen Martinez, working as a nursing supervisor at a hospital in San Antonio. Making that phone call was the hardest thing Rebecca had ever done. "Ms. Chen Martinez? My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a nurse at Huntsville Prison, and I'm calling about Darius Mitchell." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Is he—" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "He's in the infirmary. His time is limited, and he asked me to contact you." Rebecca took a deep breath. "He has something he needs to tell you. Something he should have told you 30 years ago." "I don't want to hear it. Whatever excuse he has, whatever story he's concocted, I don't—" "He took the fall for someone else. He went to prison to protect you and your son." Rebecca spoke quickly before Sarah could hang up. "And he has proof. Evidence that could bring down a state senator and finally give you answers about why he disappeared." Another long silence. "What kind of proof?" Rebecca explained everything. The accident, Richard Castellano, the deal, the evidence Darius had kept. She told Sarah about her own connection to the story, about Uncle Miguel, about the 30 years of lies that had shaped all their lives. When she finished, Sarah was crying. "I have a son who's never known his father, who grew up believing he was abandoned, who carries that wound every single day." Sarah's voice shook with emotion. "And you're telling me it was all to protect us?" "That's what Darius says, and the evidence supports it. I need to see him. I need to hear it from him." "Then come. But come soon." Rebecca looked at Darius, who was sleeping fitfully. "He doesn't have much time left." Sarah arrived the next morning, accompanied by a young man who could only be her son. He had Darius's eyes, his strong build, his quiet intensity. Rebecca met them at the prison entrance, guiding them through security and preparing them for what they would see. "He's weaker than he was even a few days ago," Rebecca warned. "But he's lucid. He can tell you everything." Sarah nodded, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Her son, whose name was Marcus, Rebecca learned, stayed close to his mother, his jaw set in a hard line. When they entered the infirmary, Darius was awake. His eyes found Sarah immediately, and the expression on his face was one of such profound love and regret that Rebecca had to look away. "Sarah." His voice broke on her name. Sarah stood frozen at the foot of the bed, staring at the man she'd once loved. "Darius, you're even more beautiful than I remembered." "Don't." Sarah's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare try to charm me after 30 years of silence." "I'm not trying to charm you. I'm trying to apologize." Darius looked at Marcus. "And you must be my son." Marcus said nothing, his face unreadable. "I know you have no reason to believe me, no reason to forgive me, but I need you to hear the truth." Darius began to tell the story again, his voice growing weaker with each sentence. Sarah and Marcus listened in silence, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion to horror as the full picture emerged. When Darius finished, Sarah sank into a chair. "All this time, all these years, I thought you didn't love us enough to stay. I loved you too much to let you suffer." Darius reached toward her, his hand trembling. "But I see now that I was wrong. I should have fought, should have trusted you to be strong enough to face the truth together." Marcus finally spoke, his voice rough. "You let me grow up thinking my father was a coward. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Darius looked at his son with tears streaming down his face. "I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I just hurt you in a different way." Marcus stepped closer to the bed, his fists clenched. "You don't get to apologize and make this okay. You don't get to show up at the end and expect forgiveness." "I don't expect anything." Darius's voice was barely a whisper. "I just needed you to know the truth before I'm gone." Sarah stood, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. "Marcus, wait outside, please." "Mom, please." Marcus left reluctantly, his footsteps heavy with anger. Sarah turned back to Darius, her eyes searching his face for the man she'd once known. "Show me the evidence. Show me everything." Rebecca brought forward the envelope, spreading the contents on the bedside table. Sarah examined each document with the careful attention of someone who'd spent 30 years needing answers. Her hands shook as she read Richard Castellano's emails, as she saw the photographs of the faulty equipment. "This is real," she whispered. "All of it. Every word." Darius watched her face. "Richard Castellano destroyed our lives to save his career. And he's been living free while I rotted in here." Sarah looked up, her eyes blazing. "Then we're going to make sure everyone knows what he did." "That's my last wish," Darius said. "Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just justice for Miguel Torres, for us, for everyone he's hurt." Sarah took his hand, the first physical contact in 3 decades. "I'll make sure of it. I promise." Darius closed his eyes, a small smile on his lips. "Thank you. That's all I needed to hear." Rebecca watched them, feeling the weight of 30 years of pain and love and loss filling the small room. Outside, Marcus paced in the hallway, his world forever changed by the truth. The next morning, Maria's story broke. "State Senator linked to 30-year cover-up in construction workers' passing," screamed the headline. Within hours, every major news outlet in Texas was running the story. Richard Castellano's office issued a denial, calling it a desperate attempt by a convicted criminal to rewrite history, but the evidence was undeniable. Rebecca watched the news coverage from the infirmary, Darius sleeping peacefully for the first time since she'd met him. Sarah had stayed through the night, sitting beside his bed, sometimes talking, sometimes just holding his hand in silence. "He looks peaceful," Sarah said softly. "He is. Knowing the truth is out there, that you believe him, it's given him something he hasn't had in 30 years. Peace, hope." Rebecca checked his vitals. Hope that his sacrifice meant something, that his son might understand someday. Sarah wiped her eyes. Marcus is angry, so angry, but underneath that, I think he's relieved. He's spent his whole life feeling abandoned. At least now he knows why. Will you tell him to come back? When he's ready, he needs time to process. Sarah looked at Darius's sleeping face. We all do. Rebecca's phone buzzed. Her cousin Maria. Turn on Channel 7. Now. On the screen, Patricia Okonkwo stood at a podium surrounded by microphones. Today, we're filing a motion to vacate Darius Mitchell's conviction based on newly discovered evidence of coercion and prosecutorial misconduct. We're also calling for a full investigation into former District Attorney Richard Castellano's role in covering up negligent homicide. The room erupted with questions from reporters. By afternoon, Richard Castellano had resigned from the state senate. His lawyer released a statement claiming health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The Attorney General announced a formal investigation. The district attorney's office began reviewing other cases Castellano had prosecuted during his tenure. And in the infirmary, Darius woke to find not just Sarah, but Marcus standing beside his bed. I'm still angry, Marcus said without preamble. I'm angry you weren't there. Angry you made that choice. Angry I lost 30 years with a father. You have every right to be. But I'm also grateful. Grateful you're telling the truth now. Grateful you tried to protect us, even if it was the wrong choice. Marcus's voice cracked. And I'm grateful I get to meet you before it's too late. Darius reached for his son's hand. Tell me about your life. Tell me everything. For the next hour, Marcus talked. About growing up, about becoming a teacher, about his own children, Darius's grandchildren, who he'd brought photographs of. Sarah added details, filling in the gaps, painting a picture of the life they'd built despite everything. Darius listened with tears streaming down his face, asking questions, laughing at stories, grieving for all he'd missed. But underneath the grief was something else. Pride. Pride in the man his son had become. Pride in the strength Sarah had shown. Pride in the family that had survived without him. You did good, he told Sarah. You raised an incredible man. We did it together, Marcus said quietly. Even when you weren't there, you were there. Mom told me stories, kept your memory alive. Rebecca's family arrived that evening. Her mother, her aunts, her cousins, all the people who'd carried Miguel Torres's memory for 30 years. They gathered in the infirmary's small conference room, Rebecca standing before them with the evidence spread across the table. Uncle Miguel didn't pass because of negligence, she said. He passed because Richard Castellano valued profit over safety, and Darius Mitchell went to prison to protect his family and ours. Her mother, Miguel's sister, picked up one of the photographs. All this time, we blamed the wrong man. We all did. Rebecca's voice was thick with emotion. But now we have a chance to make it right. To get justice for Uncle Miguel. To make sure Castellano pays for what he did. Her cousin Maria stepped forward. I've been contacted by 3 other families. 3 other construction workers who were injured or passed on projects Castellano oversaw. They're willing to come forward now, to add their voices to ours. The room buzzed with conversation, with anger, with a growing sense of purpose. Rebecca watched her family transform their grief into determination, their pain into action. What do you need from us? Her mother asked. Testimony, statements, anything you remember about the investigation, about what you were told, about how you were treated. Rebecca looked at each face. And I need you to meet Darius Mitchell, to hear his story directly. There was hesitation, old anger dying hard, but slowly, one by one, they nodded. The meeting happened the next day. Rebecca's family filed into the infirmary, their faces a mixture of curiosity and residual resentment. Darius sat propped up in bed, Sarah and Marcus on either side of him, a united front. Rebecca made introductions, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Mr. Mitchell, this is my family, Miguel Torres's family. Darius looked at each face, his own expression one of profound remorse. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss, and for my part in letting the real culprit escape justice. Rebecca's mother stepped forward. My brother was a good man. He had dreams, a family, a future. I know. I worked beside him for 2 years. He talked about his children constantly. About you, his sister, and how proud he was of your nursing career. Darius's voice broke. He deserved better than what happened, better than the lies that followed. Why didn't you tell the truth? Because I was afraid, because I was weak, because I believed Castellano's threats and thought I was protecting people by staying silent. Darius met her eyes. But silence just created more victims, more pain, more injustice. Rebecca's mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something that shocked everyone in the room. She reached out and took Darius's hand. Thank you for finally speaking up, for giving us the truth, even if it came late. The gesture broke something open in the room. Other family members stepped forward, sharing memories of Miguel, asking questions, slowly building a bridge across 30 years of misunderstanding. That night, Darius's condition worsened. Rebecca increased his medication, made him comfortable, and called Sarah and Marcus back to the prison. They arrived within the hour, both of them understanding what the call meant. "Is this it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Soon," Rebecca said gently, "but he's not in pain. He's at peace." They sat on either side of his bed, each holding one of his hands. Darius drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking clearly, sometimes mumbling fragments of memories. "Sarah," he whispered during a lucid moment, "I need to tell you something. I'm here. I never stopped loving you, not for one single day in 30 years. His eyes found hers. You were my first thought every morning, and my last thought every night. Sarah's tears fell freely. I never stopped loving you either. Even when I was angry, even when I tried to move on, you were always there. Did you move on? I remarried. A good man named Robert. He passed 5 years ago. Sarah smiled through her tears. He knew about you. I told him everything. He said any man who'd sacrificed 30 years for his family was someone worth remembering. He sounds like he was good to you. He was. But Darius... Sarah leaned closer. You were my first love, and that never goes away. Marcus squeezed his father's other hand. I'm going to tell your grandchildren about you. The real story, about the sacrifice you made. Tell them to be braver than I was, to fight for truth even when it's hard. Rebecca stood in the doorway, giving the family privacy but staying close in case they needed her. She thought about her own father, still alive but distant, their relationship strained by years of disappointment and unmet expectations. She thought about the choices people made, the sacrifices they offered, the ways love could manifest in both beautiful and broken ways. Her phone buzzed. Patricia Okonkwo. The DA just announced they're vacating Darius's conviction. Effective immediately. He's a free man. Rebecca's breath caught. He's dying. I know, but he'll pass as an innocent man. That matters. It did matter. Rebecca entered the room, approaching the bed. Darius, I have news. He opened his eyes, focusing on her with effort. Your conviction has been vacated. You're free. Innocent in the eyes of the law. Darius's face transformed, 30 years of weight lifting in an instant. Free, he whispered, after all this time. Free, Rebecca confirmed, and Richard Castellano has been arrested. He's being charged with negligent homicide, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. Sarah gasped. They arrested him an hour ago. It's all over the news. Rebecca smiled. Justice is finally being served. Darius closed his eyes, a smile on his lips. Miguel can rest now. You all can rest. So can you, Marcus said softly. You did it, Dad. You told the truth. You made it right. We made it right. Together. Darius's breathing slowed. That's what family does. Darius Mitchell passed peacefully 3 hours later, surrounded by the family he'd sacrificed everything to protect. His last words were, I love you, directed at Sarah and Marcus, his last gesture a squeeze of Rebecca's hand in gratitude. Rebecca stood with the family as they said their goodbyes, as they grieved not just for the man who'd passed, but for the 30 years they'd lost. But underneath the grief was something else, a sense of completion, of justice finally served, of truth finally told. The funeral was held a week later. Rebecca attended with her entire family, standing beside Sarah and Marcus as they laid Darius to rest. The media was there too, covering the story of the man who'd spent 30 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, who'd finally cleared his name in his last days. Richard Castellanos' trial was scheduled for the following month. Patricia Okonkwo was confident they had enough evidence for a conviction. 3 other families had come forward with similar stories of negligence and cover-ups. The case was growing, expanding, revealing a pattern of corruption that had lasted decades. But for Rebecca, the real story wasn't about Castellanos' downfall. It was about the connections that had been forged in the infirmary, the healing that had begun, the way truth had set them all free. Sarah approached her after the service. "Thank you for listening to him, for believing him, for making all of this possible." "I almost didn't," Rebecca admitted. "I almost walked away. But you didn't, that's what matters." Ideal. 6 months later, Rebecca stood in a courtroom, watching Richard Castellano being sentenced to 15 years in prison. Her family sat behind her, along with Sarah, Marcus, and the families of 3 other victims. Patricia Okonkwo had built an airtight case, and the jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours. As Castellano was led away, Rebecca felt a hand on her shoulder. Her mother. "Miguel can rest now," her mother said. "We all can." Rebecca nodded, thinking about Darius, about the impossible choice he'd made, and the courage it had taken to finally tell the truth. She thought about her uncle Miguel, about the life cut short and the family left behind. She thought about Sarah and Marcus, rebuilding their relationship with a father's memory, honoring his sacrifice by living fully. And she thought about herself, about the walls she'd built around her heart, and the way Darius's story had broken them down. She'd become a prison nurse to understand her father's world, but she'd learned something more important, that everyone had a story, that judgment was easy, but understanding was hard, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was listen. After the sentencing, the families gathered at a restaurant, sharing a meal and stories. Marcus showed photographs of Darius's grandchildren, talking about how he was teaching them about their grandfather's courage. Sarah shared memories of the man Darius had been before prison, the dreams they'd had, the life they'd planned. Rebecca's cousin Maria announced she was writing a book about the case, about the systemic failures that had allowed Castellano to operate unchecked for so long. As the evening wound down, Rebecca found herself standing outside with Sarah, both of them looking up at the Texas stars. "Do you think he knows?" Sarah asked. "That justice was served? That his sacrifice meant something?" "I think he knew before he passed. He saw it beginning. He knew the truth was out." Rebecca smiled. "And yes, I think he knows. I think he's at peace. I spent so many years angry at him, bitter, feeling abandoned." Sarah's voice was soft. "And now I just feel grateful. Grateful for the time we had. Grateful for the son he gave me. Grateful that he loved us enough to try to protect us, even if it was the wrong way. It wasn't entirely wrong. He kept you safe. He kept my family from being targeted. He made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. But he also taught us something important." Sarah turned to Rebecca. "That silence, even well-intentioned silence, creates its own kind of harm. That truth, no matter how painful, is better than comfortable lies." Rebecca nodded, thinking about her own life, her own choices, the truths she'd been avoiding. "I'm going to visit my father. We haven't spoken in 5 years, but after everything with Darius, I realize I don't want to waste any more time." "That's good. That's really good." Sarah hugged her. "Thank you, Rebecca, for everything, for being brave enough to listen when you could have walked away. Thank you for being brave enough to forgive." Rebecca drove to the prison where her father was incarcerated the following weekend. She hadn't seen him since his conviction, had cut him out of her life completely, unable to reconcile the father she'd loved with the man who'd made such destructive choices. But Darius's story had changed something in her, had shown her that people were more than their worst moments, that understanding didn't mean excusing, that connection was possible even across the deepest divides. Her father looked older, greyer, smaller than she remembered, but his eyes lit up when he saw her, tears streaming down his face. "Mija," he whispered. "You came." "I came." Rebecca sat across from him, the familiar prison visiting room bringing back memories of childhood visits, of confusion and shame and love, all tangled together. "I have something to tell you. About Uncle Miguel." She told him everything, about Darius, about Castellano, about the truth that had finally emerged. Her father listened in stunned silence, his hands gripping the table. "All this time," he said finally, "all this time we blamed the wrong man." "We did. But now it's right. Now Miguel has justice." Her father was quiet for a long moment. "I'm proud of you for helping make that happen, for being brave enough to listen." "I learned it from you," Rebecca said, surprising herself. "You always told me to see people, not just their circumstances." "I forgot that for a while, but I'm remembering now." They talked for the rest of the visiting hour, rebuilding bridges, sharing stories, beginning the slow work of healing. And a year after Darius's passing, Rebecca stood at the dedication of the Miguel Torres Memorial Park in Austin. The city had used funds from the settlement with Castellano's construction company to create a community space honoring Miguel and the other workers who'd been victims of corporate negligence. Sarah and Marcus were there, along with Rebecca's entire family. Patricia Okonkwo gave a speech about justice delayed but not denied. Maria read from her book, which had become a bestseller and sparked conversations about prison reform and corporate accountability across the state. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus stepped to the podium with his children, Darius's grandchildren, beside him. "My father spent 30 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit," Marcus said, his voice strong and clear. "But he didn't waste those years. He kept records. He documented truth. He waited for the right moment to speak up. And when that moment came, he had the courage to tell his story, even knowing he wouldn't live to see justice fully served." He looked at his children. "I'm teaching my kids about their grandfather, not as a victim, not as a criminal, but as a man who made an impossible choice and then found the courage to make it right. That's the legacy I want them to carry, not perfection, but the willingness to fight for truth, no matter the cost." The crowd applauded, and Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. She thought about that night in the infirmary when Darius had first asked for her help, when she'd almost said no, when she'd almost let fear and protocol keep her from listening. She thought about how different everything would be if she'd made that choice. Castellano would still be free, the truth would still be buried, and all of them would still be carrying the weight of lies and misunderstanding. If stories of redemption and humanity touch your heart, please like this video and subscribe. It helps us continue sharing these powerful true stories of transformation and hope.